So what is ideation? It's part of the creativity process. It's internal as well as external, so there's a lot of discussion around whether or not ideation is only what happens inside your brain. But there's a number of aspects to it. It is to do with being with other people as well as being on your own. So we'll talk in a little bit about exactly what happens in your brain, but the creativity process is thinking new thoughts, really. The innovation process is putting them into practice. So how do you come up with a new idea? Ideation is a process of things layering and coming together and patterns breaking and reconnecting, and eventually you have a different type of idea. Think about being in different companies, whether it was working in industrial relations, what are the problems, what do people have to think about, or it's looking at a new structure of a company. It's looking at what is the question and what are the connections. And ideation takes everyone's view into consideration, because it doesn't matter where you are in an organisation or in a process or with a problem, you will see it from your point of view. And the beauty of ideation is having other input, communication and other angles that come in, and what they then do is they fill out what the question is, and they give you all sorts of different angles to the answer, and you get a very rich tapestry to work from, and you get a much more, I guess, novel but also a workable answer as well. One of the first things that ideation is really good at is saying, is this the right question? And then being able to step back to say, is there another question, or is it being asked the right way? Is it being asked of the right people? Have we answered this in another way but we just haven't noticed? So all of those kind of questions are really part of ideation, and they should be part of running a normal operation as well as a startup, because we get lulled into a false sense of thinking we understand what's going on. And the ideation process is very good at bringing us back to the beginning and saying, have we got a question here? Have we asked the right question? Have we asked it of the right people? And are we going in the right direction? And what have we missed? Because very often we're very comfortable with the fact that we know what we're doing. Okay, so some of the theories around ideation are to do with whether you do it alone, whether you do it together. I think what we're seeing is that a mixture of both is really good. And if I can take an example of a method, a process that people use, one of the favourite processes is brainstorming. Brainstorming's great, but it's also got some issues. So depending on how you're brainstorming and when you're brainstorming, it can work or not. If you're going to brainstorm, it's really good to have people already with some sort of idea about what they want to do, because you need to have an idea of what you're actually shooting at. Again, what is the question? But there's a number of things that happen when you're brainstorming that aren't necessarily very useful. So if you have a situation where you haven't got focus, or if you have people who are going to sort of jump to outcomes because they're going to be tested on whether they've maximised ideas rather than are these optimal ideas, or if you get groupthink, or if you had any sort of political dynamic in the group, which is pretty common, then it can be a problem. One of the things that some people do is reverse brainstorm, and that actually works better, because instead of coming in and saying, let's get a solution to this, if I come in instead and say, well, what's not working, what is not going to work here, and why won't it work? Why wouldn't we bother to do this? Again, it's a brand new way of thinking, and the brain gets interested, and people stop trying to do that kind of point scoring sticky note thing, and they start to figure out what the blockages are and why it might fail, and then you flip it. So halfway through reverse brainstorming, you flip, and by then people are more in a cycle of using a different sort of methodology. What do you allow people to do on their own? How do you get people together? And then the big thing that's really important with people being together is something called team reflexivity. And what that is can the group reflect together, and can they communicate around the ideas? And that's much more important than how many post-it notes have you got. There's some interesting relationships between entrepreneurship and ideation. Entrepreneurs, some people think are really high risk takers. They're actually not in general. What they are is very practical as well as being imaginative. So a good entrepreneur, and if you want to take the Teslas, the Googles, the Apples, what they're very good at is thinking about usefulness rather than usability. So thinking about what is the problem to be solved rather than how can I make money is a completely different angle. So entrepreneurs are really good at trying to think what is the issue and what would be useful in a solution, rather than the straight money makers who just think, how can I do something to maximise profit? Because you might start something, but you don't end a winner if that's your outcome. So a startup is a typical example of where you can use ideation, and the formal processes are things like defining your pattern, collecting information, creating ideas and testing and verifying. Absolutely, that's right. But the sorts of things you've got to think about are taking it back to the real basics. So make sure the question is really clear for a startup. And again, the big good companies at this tend to go back to the simple aspects of what does the product do, or what might the product do, which is what's your value add, what's your benefit, of how does it work, and that's around the features, because you think that you have features that are really necessary, but that's because you're coming from your own headspace. It's called priming. It's why we do things like put the engine in the front of a car. It's because horses were originally there. It's that sort of thing of you will tend to go the way that your brain and your experience puts you. So the third thing, which is really important then, is what does it feel like? What's the experience? And that's where going out and talking to people becomes really critical. So one of the things to think about as a startup is budgeting for ideation. You need to budget for the team being able to get together, and you need to budget for people being able to go out and actually ask users what they think. And in fact, any organisation that's really good at ideation has up to, between 10 and 20% of a job spec of everyone for an ideation process, so that they're consistently going back and saying, are we checking what they're doing? Is there another way to do this? Would we do it better? So it's a very iterative process through a life cycle, the whole life cycle of an organisation.